Welcome everyone to the show. My name is James Anthony from the James Anthony Report. This is the James Anthony Report podcast. Well, did you all see investigative journalist Steve Baker reporting on a recent episode of a show called Unfiltered, accusing General Mark Milley, one of the TV generals, one of those woke generals, as Trump calls them, of using heat and sound directed energy weapons to control crowds during the 2020 riots. Baker apparently has photo evidence to support his claims from a time that is now forever known to this generation in politics as the Summer of Love. Almost 1,000 officers were assaulted and injured during the bacon, lettuce, mayo riots after the George Floyd incident. Of course, we brought you the story first of Do's in the News, but in our reporting at jamesanthonyreport.com, we used other examples that included the Israeli beeper story, the Maui wildfires in Hawaii, and many people attending Trump rallies who reported as having felt ill. Usually things like this are met with some question asking me whether or not, because the government has such capabilities, does that mean I think it's happening? I usually respond by saying, well, I always thought these things were happening. But I can ask the question in reverse as an example of the absurdity of the question that attempts to make you and I look like fools. Which is, how about because it isn't happening, does that mean the government doesn't have the capabilities? And if they in quotations, do have the capabilities, do you think they wouldn't use it on us? On we the people? Now, I'm going to try to maintain some consistency, which is admittedly a difficult thing to do with a 24-hour news cycle these days. There are a lot of stories. And you may have extrapolated from the news story some sense that the inauguration of Donald Trump, which is sure to be an epic event with hundreds of thousands of people in attendance, may in some ways be compromised. But I then followed that up with a report supporting the notion that Trump won re-election based on the fact that he won't run, he won't hide, and as I attempt to show in the video, his rhetoric on these self-crafted issues of taking Canada over and invading Mexico are precisely why we would look like fools on a national stage if he was to suddenly be carted around in a Pope-mobile. Or if he went on the lam for a few days. The Do's story is a very real one, as I've mentioned before, and so is the latest report that I titled The Art of the Deal, which speaks more to Trump's rhetoric than anything else, and to how this rhetoric is exactly what the doctor, not Dr. Fauci, but the doctor ordered at this very moment in time. Already Trump has gotten Trudeau to resign, it seems, by just calling him out in front of the entire world, and already the colony of Greenland, property of Denmark, is on edge now with its leader claiming they're already on the road to independence. But with Donald Trump, at least it seems to me anyway, that world leaders see in themselves things they might do if given the chance to take over the world Pinky and the Brain style. If given the chance for any of these other cretins to become president of the United States, you'd bet they would attempt far worse transgressions than that of seeking to shore up the southern border and prevent a world war. And of course, this is what they're scared of. They aren't scared of Trump necessarily, but of the power he holds. Almost like a mirror he holds up, and the globalist cretins all then turn to stone, looking at themselves, realizing his potential as leader of the free world. And so Trump's rhetoric in this regard, this notion that he took a bullet for democracy, to the story we have posted up now, is not mutually exclusive with the idea that you might want to inform yourself of directed energy being directed at you. And so moving on, we had the first new Superman trailer from DC that launched not too long ago now, but which had over 24 million views in its first day on YouTube alone. If you recall, Trump-hating director James Gunn, directing this new Superman film, was essentially canceled across social media and lost his directing job with Disney over tweets that he'd sent sometime between 2008 and 2012. These sick and disturbing tweets that didn't resurface, ones that won't be mentioned here, until July of 2018, got him canned from the directing gig for Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 3. Now, not shockingly, everything has worked out just fine for Gunn, as we can tell, and he is essentially the co-chair and CEO now of DC Studios, the makers of Superman. In Gunn's promotion of the new film, set to release on July 11th this year, and a Q&A session about the trailer, Gunn said that, quote, "We do have a battered Superman in the beginning. That is our country." Closed quote. That's according to a Variety piece on the new movie. In an article on Breitbart, the director took aim at Trump, making references to his stances on illegal immigration and referring to Trump as a dark voice, it seems. But as a lifelong fan of Superman, I have to say, the darkest of times came in around 2016, when the company announced that they were doing an angle with the new Superman, at that time, Jonathan Kent, Clark's son from the future, and his romantic relationship with another man, making him bi. And if that isn't sick enough, to take a character that had already renounced his American citizenship in favor of becoming a citizen of the world, whatever that actually means, the company gave the reasoning behind the decision in an interview with CNN, with the writer saying it's time, and I'm paraphrasing here, it's time that this character represents this alternative community. Now, what I genuinely can't figure out, and what makes me believe that the writers essentially destroyed the ultimate superhero and his legacy just to sell a few issues because they simply stink at doing their jobs, is, didn't this character already represent every community? Because the motto, the old motto anyway, was truth, justice, and the American way. And I'd always took that to mean Superman was a defender of the rights and liberties of all Americans from every walk of life. In fact, as much as I still love what the character originally stood for, he was always essentially an arm of the propaganda campaigns that were pushed on us in classrooms, in print, on TVs, and film, going as far back as issue 1. But I guess I could admit that, while those on the left still think it's somehow a win that the marginalized communities they claim to love were essentially just being used by bad writers to sell a few issues. Put it another way, in the 30s, Superman was fighting communism. In the 40s, he fought the Nazis. In the 50s, it was more of a sci-fi trip. and so on and so on. And because Superman is the ultimate superhero, as I've said before, because he is simply too powerful, which renders his dilemmas too moral ones, the writers couldn't get a grasp on how to write that out. And believe me, we could get into a whole thing about that specifically. But in the 90s, he ended up having to fight angels. Like angels in heaven. Because the writers suck. And so we went from all of that history, the inception of this character that really, having been written by two Jewish guys out of Cleveland, Ohio, of all places, actually had strikingly religious attributes. The whole setup and the whole story, think about it. His parents sent their only son to save humanity from themselves. His only real enemy was a fragment of the heavenly realm that he'd come from. His trinity, if you will, was truth, justice, and the American way. He sacrificed himself repeatedly and actually defeated death at the hands of a character named Apocalypse. And now, well, in 2016 anyway, he was kissing dudes. And it's just insane. Everything from the director, his tweets and comments, and his comments about Trump, to the destruction of a beloved figure that everyone on Earth knows, all lends itself to an agenda. But because I'm such a Superman nerd, I'm excited to see what this new era brings, because I think politics being downstream from culture, we've come to the end of our ropes as Americans with this garbage, and if this movie is really that bad, after all the hype and everything, you can guarantee that Trump will make a comment on it. If it's that bad. And if comments by Trump have gotten the Prime Minister of Canada to resign, it's fair to say it may have some weighty implications in Hollywood. Put it that way. But Hollywood is currently, right now, as of this recording, on fire. And actually, that's like clockwork at this point, and whether you believe this was caused by dues, climate change, or just bad environmental policy all the way around, one of the more cringeworthy things I saw recently in sticking with this Hollywood programming theme was the debut of World Wrestling Entertainment, known to the world as WWE, and their main show, Raw, on Netflix. Now, I didn't see the entire thing, but apparently Hulk Hogan, a figure responsible for the crossover of pro wrestling into the mainstream beginning in the 1980s with the rock and wrestling movement, and a guy who launched a fairly successful acting career in his own right, but who is, much like the Superman logo, as familiar to most Americans as McDonald's, and is recognizable even to the most aloof fans, was booed out of the building in what the WWE claims was the largest indoor crowd ever in its history. Again, this is just what I'd heard, and I'd also heard that the boos came from a venue in none other than Los Angeles. And so I say this is the dividing line, a line that crosses on one side common sense, and on the other, a communist-style approach that seeks to undermine the very thing that brought its success in the first place. And it's all because Hulk Hogan endorsed Trump as his candidate for president and spoke at last year's RNC. So we should have more for you next week, but right now that's all the time we have. Thanks for listening. Check out the reports mentioned here and give the James Anthony Report a follow and support our sponsors over at JamesAnthonyReport.com. Talk soon.
Go to JamesAnthonyReport.com or click the link in the description to support our sponsors. James Anthony Report was made possible by garbage-ass people like you. Thank you.